My name is Mallory, and I'm 32 years old. Right now, I'm standing in a law office in downtown Portland, staring at the deed to a $400,000 house that I just signed over to my brother Derek. My hands are shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of what I've just done. The phone in my purse starts buzzing violently. I pull it out and see Dad's name flashing across the screen, except Dad's been dead for 3 months. It's my sister Bethany calling from his old number. I answer, and before I can say hello, my father's voice explodes through the speaker, except it's Bethany doing a cruel imitation. Then her real voice cuts through, shrill and venomous. That money was for her loans. You just destroyed your sister's future. Behind her, I can hear my aunt's voice joining in, a chorus of rage and betrayal. I look across the desk at Derek, my little brother who's sitting there with tears streaming down his face, clutching the house keys like they're made of gold. But they don't know the truth about what Dad did to Derek 15 years ago. Before we dive into this whole mess, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you're ready to hear a story about family, betrayal, and standing up for what's right even when everyone turns against you, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one because what happened next changed everything. I grew up in a place where everything looked perfect from the outside. Our house sat in one of those Connecticut neighborhoods where the lawns were always manicured, the cars were always new, and nobody ever talked about what happened behind closed doors. My father, Gerald Harper, was a successful attorney at one of the top firms in Hartford. He drove a black Mercedes, wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and had a reputation for being ruthless in the courtroom. My mother, Patricia, taught piano lessons from our home. She was gentle, soft-spoken, and always seemed to be apologizing for existing. We were 3 kids in total. I was the oldest, then came Derek, who was 3 years younger than me, and finally Bethany, the baby of the family, 7 years my junior. From the outside, we probably looked like the American dream. But inside that big house with its marble countertops and crystal chandeliers, there was a coldness that no amount of expensive furniture could warm up. Derek was different from the moment he could express himself. While other boys his age were obsessed with sports and superheroes, Derek wanted to draw. He'd spend hours at the kitchen table with crayons, then markers, then eventually proper art supplies, creating these intricate worlds on paper. I remember watching him when he was maybe 7 years old, drawing this elaborate fantasy castle with dragons and knights, and thinking that my little brother had something special. But Dad didn't see it that way. Gerald Harper had very specific ideas about what a son should be. A son should play football. A son should be tough. A son should want to be a lawyer or a doctor or a businessman. A son should not spend his time drawing pictures like some kind of dreamer. I can still hear Dad's voice from across the dinner table, cutting through Derek's excited chatter about an art project. Why can't you be normal like other boys? Why can't you throw a ball instead of wasting time with those stupid drawings? Derek would shrink into his chair, and Mom would reach over to squeeze his hand under the table, but she never spoke up. She never defended him. Dad forced Derek to join every sports team possible. Little League baseball, junior basketball, soccer, you name it. Derek hated every second of it. He wasn't athletic, he wasn't competitive, and he certainly didn't want to spend his afternoons getting screamed at by coaches while Dad stood on the sidelines looking disappointed. I'd go to his games sometimes, and I'd watch Derek stand in the outfield looking miserable, or sit on the bench with his shoulders hunched, and my heart would break for him. After games, I'd find him in his room crying, not because they lost, but because he knew he'd disappointed Dad again. He'd look at me with these red, swollen eyes and ask, "What's wrong with me, Mal? Why can't I just be what he wants?" I'd hug him and tell him there was nothing wrong with him, that he was perfect exactly as he was. But in that house, my words didn't carry much weight compared to Dad's constant criticism. Then there was Bethany. Beautiful, bright, charming Bethany who could do no wrong in Dad's eyes. She had Mom's delicate features and Dad's sharp intelligence, and from the moment she was born, she was treated like royalty. When Bethany wanted a grand piano for her room, Dad bought one that cost $15,000. When she wanted to go to summer camp in Switzerland, Dad wrote the check without blinking. When she mentioned wanting a specific dress for a school dance, Dad would drive her to the designer store in Manhattan. Meanwhile, Derek would ask for $50 to buy some quality art supplies for a school project, and Dad would lecture him about wasting money on frivolous hobbies. I watched Bethany get a $500 dress for a party she ended up not even attending, while Derek wore the same worn-out sneakers for 2 years because Dad said he didn't deserve new ones until he made the basketball team. The inequity was staggering, and it got worse as we got older. I became Derek's protector by necessity. I was the one who snuck him money from my part-time job at the mall so he could buy the art supplies he needed. I was the one who covered for him when he wanted to skip baseball practice to work on a portfolio piece. I was the one who stood between him and Dad's anger when those report cards came home with, as in art class but C's in gym. Derek started calling me his guardian angel, and in a way, I suppose I was. We had this unspoken understanding that in a house where he wasn't wanted, at least he had one person in his corner. He'd show me his drawings late at night, whispering about the art school he dreamed of attending, and I'd promise him that someday he'd get there. I believed it too. I had no idea that Dad would make sure that day never came. Derek was 17 when everything fell apart. It was spring of his junior year in high school, and his art teacher, Mrs. Chen, had been working with him on applications to prestigious art programs. Derek had this dream, this burning passion to attend the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the best art schools in the country. He'd been working on his portfolio for months, staying up until 2 in the morning perfecting every piece. It helped him organize everything, even written some of his application essays during my college breaks. When the acceptance letter came in March, Derek practically flew through the front door. I was home for spring break from my senior year at Boston University, and I'll never forget the look on his face when he burst into my room waving that letter. His hands were trembling, his eyes were shining with tears, and he kept saying, "I got in, Mal. I actually got in. They want me." We cried together in my room, hugging and jumping around like idiots, because this was his ticket out. This was his chance to finally be somewhere he was valued for who he actually was. That night, we had a family dinner. Mom had made pot roast, which was Dad's favorite, and the table was set with the good china. Derek could barely sit still through the meal. He kept fidgeting with his napkin, looking at me with this nervous excitement. Finally, between the main course and dessert, he cleared his throat and announced his news. "Dad, Mom, I have something important to tell everyone. I got accepted to RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. It's one of the top art schools in the entire country, and they accepted me into their illustration program." He was beaming, waiting for congratulations, waiting for someone to be proud of him. The silence that followed was deafening. Bethany, who was 10 at the time, kept eating her mashed potatoes, completely uninterested. Mom's face lit up for a moment, and she started to say something, but then she looked at Dad and stopped. Dad put down his fork very slowly, very deliberately. His face had gone red, and I could see the vein in his temple starting to pulse the way it always did when he was about to explode. Art school. Dad's voice was quiet at first, which was somehow more terrifying than if Head started yelling immediately. "You think you're going to art school? That's not a real career, Derek. That's a hobby. You're going to business school, just like we discussed." Derek's face fell. "But Dad, we never discussed that. I never wanted to go to business school. Art is what I'm good at. It's what I love." That's when Dad stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "You're good at it? You think being good at drawing pictures is going to pay your bills? You think it's going to support a family? You're living in a fantasy world, and I won't pay for you to waste 4 years pursuing some pipe dream." Derek's voice was shaking, but he stood his ground, maybe for the first time in his life. "This isn't a pipe dream, Dad. This is my life. This is what I want to do with my future." The slap came so fast that none of us saw it coming. Dad's hand connected with Derek's cheek with a crack that echoed through the dining room. Derek stumbled backward, his hand flying to his face, shock written all over his features. Mom gasped and jumped up from her chair. Gerald, no. But Dad wasn't done. Don't you dare talk back to me in my own house. I've spent 17 years raising you, feeding you, putting a roof over your head, and this is how you repay me? By throwing your life away on art school. Dad was shouting now, really shouting, and spit was flying from his mouth. You want to be an artist? Fine. You can be a starving artist on someone else's dime because I'm not paying a single penny for that nonsense. Derek was crying now, tears streaming down his face, but there was something else there too. Something I'd never seen in my little brother before. Anger. Real, burning anger. You've never supported anything I've ever wanted to do. You've spent my whole life trying to turn me into someone I'm not. I'm not you, Dad. I don't want to be you. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Dad's face went from red to almost purple. If that's how you feel, then maybe you should find somewhere else to live. You want to make your own decisions? You want to be an adult? Then act like one and get out of my house. Mom was crying now, begging Dad to calm down, but he ignored her completely. I tried to step in, tried to reason with him, but he turned that fury on me too. And you, Mallory, you've been encouraging this nonsense. Filling his head with these ridiculous ideas. This is partly your fault. The argument continued for another hour, escalating until the entire neighborhood could probably hear us. Dad delivered his ultimatum with the cold precision of a closing argument in court. You have two choices, Derek. You drop this art school nonsense, you apply to business programs like a reasonable person, or you pack your bags and leave this house tonight. Those are your only options. Derek looked at Mom, desperate for her to intervene, but she just stood there crying, wringing her hands, unable to stand up to her husband even to save her son. Derek looked at Bethany, who had left the table at some point and was now upstairs in her room, probably putting on headphones to block out the fighting like she always did. Then Derek looked at me, and I saw something break inside him. I won't give up my dream, Dad. I can't. That's when Dad did something unforgivable. He walked to his study, found the contact information for Rizd, and called them right there in front of all of us. I watched in horror as my father, using his lawyer voice, his professional voice, calmly explained to the admissions office that there had been a mistake, that his son would not be accepting their offer, and that they should withdraw his application immediately. Derek tried to grab the phone, but Dad pushed him away. By the time Dad hung up, Derek was on his knees, sobbing. You had no right. That was my future. That was my life. Dad looked down at him with disgust. Your future is whatever I say it is as long as you live under my roof. Now make your choice. Derek packed that night. I helped him, both of us crying as we shoved his clothes into a duffel bag. He didn't own much. Some clothes, his art supplies, a few books. I emptied my bank account and gave him $2,000, everything I'd saved from my work-study job at college. This isn't enough. I kept saying, this isn't enough for you to start over. But Derek hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. You're the only one who ever loved me, Mal. The only one who ever saw me as more than a disappointment. We stood at the front door at almost midnight. It was raining, a cold March rain that felt appropriate for the worst night of our lives. Mom stood behind us, crying but silent. Dad was in his study with the door closed. Bethany was asleep upstairs, oblivious to the fact that her brother was leaving forever. Derek looked at me one last time. I'll call you when I get settled somewhere. Then he walked out into the rain with nothing but a duffel bag and $2,000 to his name, and I watched my little brother disappear into the darkness. I didn't know then that it would be 15 years before I saw him again. The first few weeks after Derek left were the hardest. I called his phone constantly, sent dozens of text messages, but they all went unanswered. His phone was eventually disconnected. I reached out to every friend of his I could find on social media, but nobody had heard from him. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. I was finishing my senior year at Boston University, trying to focus on final exams and graduation, but all I could think about was my little brother out there somewhere, alone and probably struggling. I failed 2 exams that semester because I couldn't concentrate. I'd sit in the library with textbooks open in front of me, but all I saw was Derek's face as he walked out into that rain. When I came home for summer break after graduation, the house felt like a mausoleum. Dad had forbidden anyone from mentioning Derek's name, had removed all of Derek's photos from the walls, boxed up everything from his room, and acted as if his son had never existed. If I tried to bring Derek up, Dad would leave the room or change the subject. Mom was a shell of herself, moving through the house like a ghost, spending most of her days in bed. Shed started taking prescription pills for anxiety and depression, and I'd often find her staring out the window with tears running down her face. I got a job at a financial firm in Hartford, trying to build a career while secretly using every resource I had to find Derek. I hired a private investigator at one point, but he came up empty after 3 months and $5,000. I checked homeless shelters in major cities. I called hospitals. I even filed a missing persons report. But since Derek was an adult who'd left voluntarily, the police couldn't do much. Social media was still relatively new back then, but I checked every platform obsessively, searching for any trace of him. Nothing. It was like he'd disappeared from the face of the earth. At night, I'd lie awake, imagining the worst. Was he dead in a ditch somewhere? Was he suffering? Was he thinking about us at all? Or had he cut us out of his heart completely the way Dad had cut him out of the family? The not knowing was torture, worse than any answer could have been. I met Trevor during this time, at a work conference about 3 years after Derek left. Trevor was an architect, kind and patient, with gentle eyes and a quiet strength that drew me in. On our third date, I broke down and told him everything about Derek. I expected him to run for the hills because who wants to date someone carrying that much baggage? But instead, Trevor held my hand and said, "Well, find him. I promise you. Well, keep looking until we find him." Trevor became my partner in the search. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone that passed, we'd dedicate time to looking for Derek. Trevor would help me draft new social media posts, share missing person information in online forums, contact art galleries in case Derek had managed to pursue his passion somewhere. But year after year, there was nothing. Life went on despite the gaping hole in my heart. I married Trevor in a small ceremony that felt incomplete without my brother there. We bought a house in the suburbs. I got promoted at work, climbing the corporate ladder while feeling hollow inside. Then we had Lily, our beautiful daughter, and I held her in the hospital and cried because Derek would never meet his niece. I'd look at Lily and wonder if I'd done enough to find him, if there was something I'd missed, some stone I'd left unturned. The guilt ate at me constantly, a low-grade ache that never fully went away. Every year on Derek's birthday, I'd light a candle and pray that wherever he was okay. I'd imagine him thriving somewhere, happy and successful, having moved past the trauma of our family. That fantasy was better than imagining the alternatives. Meanwhile, Dad doubled down on Bethany. With Derek gone and me living my own life, Bethany became the sole focus of Dad's ambitions. He controlled every aspect of her life. But unlike with Derek, Bethany didn't seem to mind. She thrived under his attention. Dad paid her full tuition to the University of Pennsylvania, bought her a BMW when she graduated, set her up in a luxury apartment in Philadelphia. Bethany became a consultant at a prestigious firm, making 6 figures before she turned 25. She was everything Dad had wanted Derek to be. Ambitious, successful, conventional. But there was something cold about Bethany that had developed over the years. Maybe it was Dad's influence, or maybe it was just who she'd always been, but she showed little empathy for anyone else's struggles. The few times I tried to talk to her about Derek, she'd roll her eyes and say things like, "He made his choice, Mal. Why are you still obsessing over someone who clearly doesn't want to be found?" I'd remind her that Derek was our brother, that had been driven out by Dad's cruelty, but Bethany would just shrug. Dad was tough on him because he saw potential being wasted. Derek was too sensitive to handle real parenting. Those words made me sick to my stomach, but they also showed me who Bethany had become. She was Dad's daughter through and through. Mom got sicker as the years passed. The depression and anxiety she'd developed after Derek left never fully went away. She developed liver problems from all the medications she was taking, and eventually, those liver problems turned into something worse. When I was 29 years old, Mom was diagnosed with liver cancer, stage 4, terminal. We had maybe 6 months with her, and I spent every moment I could at her bedside. Dad seemed almost annoyed by her illness, as if dying was an inconvenience to his schedule. Bethany would visit for an hour here and there, always with one eye on her phone, always rushing off to the next important meeting. But I was there, and in those final weeks, Mom finally talked about Derek. I failed him, she'd whisper, her voice weak and raspy. I knew what your father was doing was wrong, and I just stood there. I let Gerald destroy that beautiful boy's spirit, and I'll never forgive myself. She'd cry, and I'd hold her fragile hand and tell her it wasn't her fault. But we both knew that wasn't entirely true. 2 days before she died, she gripped my hand with surprising strength and looked me dead in the eye. Find your brother, Mallory. However long it takes, whatever you have to do, find Derek and tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I loved him. Tell him I thought about him every single day. I promised her I would. Mom died on a Tuesday morning in October, with just me and a nurse in the room. Dad was at work. Bethany was in a meeting. Trevor brought Lily to the hospital so Mom could hold her granddaughter one last time, and then she was gone. At the funeral, I looked at Derek's empty seat and wanted to scream. 7 years after Mom's death, when I'd almost given up hope of ever seeing my brother again, I got a Facebook message from someone named Marcus Chen. The name meant nothing to me at first, but the message made my heart stop. Hi Mallory. You don't know me, but I was in high school with your brother Derek. I think I saw him a few weeks ago in Portland, Oregon. I'm not 100% sure it was him, because he looks really different, but something about the eyes was familiar. I tried to approach him, but he got on a bus before I could catch up. I saw your missing person posts from years ago and thought you'd want to know. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type a response. Portland, Oregon. That was across the entire country from Connecticut. But it was something. It was more than I'd had in 15 years. I showed Trevor the message, and he immediately started looking up flights. I'm going with you, he said, and I loved him even more in that moment. We left Lily with Trevor's parents and flew to Portland the next day. I'd contacted a private investigator named Ross who specialized in finding missing persons, and he met us at the airport with a folder full of information. I've been checking homeless shelters, soup kitchens, low-income housing registers, Ross explained as we drove through Portland's rainy streets. There are a lot of places someone could disappear in a city like this, but we'll find him. It took 2 weeks of searching, 2 weeks of walking through parts of Portland I'd never known existed, showing Derek's old photo to everyone we met. Most people didn't recognize him, or if they did, they weren't talking. The homeless community is tight-knit and protective, and we were outsiders. But Ross was patient and persistent, and finally, a woman at a community center recognized Derek's photo. Oh yeah, I know him. Quiet guy, keeps to himself. I think he lives in the trailer park off Division Street. Works nights at the diner down the block. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out as Ross drove us to the trailer park. It was one of those run-down places where the trailers looked like they might fall apart in the next strong wind. Rusted metal, peeling paint, yards full of debris. We pulled up to the address the woman had given us, and I just sat in the car for a moment, terrified. What if he didn't want to see me? What if he hated me for not protecting him better? What if the years had changed him into someone I didn't recognize? Trevor squeezed my hand. Only one way to find out. I got out of the car and walked to the trailer door, my legs feeling like jelly. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Then I heard movement inside, and the door opened. The man who answered the door was Derek, but he was also a stranger. Head always been thin, but now he was gaunt, his cheekbones sharp beneath skin that looked like it hadn't seen enough sun in years. His hair was longer than he used to wear it, pulled back in a messy bun. He had a scraggly beard. But his eyes, those soft brown eyes that used to light up when he talked about his art, those were the same. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. His face went through about a dozen emotions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, fear, and then something that looked like desperate hope. Mal. His voice cracked on my name. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. And then we were hugging, both of us sobbing like children. He was so thin I could feel his ribs through his worn shirt, and he was shaking, and I was holding him as tight as I could without breaking him. "I thought you all forgot about me," he kept saying between sobs. "I thought nobody cared. I thought I was dead to all of you." I pulled back to look at him, my hands on his shoulders. "I never stopped looking for you. Not for a single day in 15 years. I never forgot about you, Derek. Never." We stood there in the doorway of his tiny trailer, crying and holding each other, while Trevor and Ross waited respectfully in the car. Inside the trailer, I saw how Derek had been living. The place was maybe 200 square feet total, with a bed that was little more than a cot, a hot plate for cooking, and a small table. The walls were thin, and I could see gaps where the insulation had failed. There was a space heater in the corner that looked like a fire hazard. But what broke my heart most was seeing his art supplies crammed into one corner, cheap materials from dollar stores, and sketches pinned to the walls that showed the talent that had never died despite everything Head been through. Derek made us instant coffee on his hot plate, his hands still trembling, and then he told me his story. After Head left home that night, Head taken a bus as far west as the $2,000 ID given him would take him. Head ended up in Oregon with no plan, no connections, and no safety net. Head slept in shelters at first, then on the streets when the shelters were full. Head worked whatever jobs he could find, washing dishes, cleaning offices at night, day labor when he could get it. Head tried to save money to take classes, to pursue art in some form, but every time he got close to having enough saved, something would happen. Head get sick and have to pay for medicine. Head get robbed. The place he was staying would raise the rent. It was a constant cycle of almost getting ahead and then falling back down. Then, 3 years ago, Derek had been in a terrible accident. He was crossing the street on his way home from his dishwashing job when a car ran a red light and hit him. His left leg was shattered in multiple places. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital, had 3 surgeries, and was left with a permanent limp and chronic pain. But the worst part was the medical bills. $80,000. He had no insurance, no way to pay, and the debt collectors had been hounding him ever since. They'd garnished what little wages he made, destroyed his credit, and made it nearly impossible for him to rent anything better than this trailer. "I wanted to call you so many times," Derek said, staring down at his coffee cup. "Especially after the accident, but I was so ashamed. I'd failed at everything. Dad was right about me. I couldn't make it as an artist. I couldn't make it as anything." I grabbed his hand. "Dad wasn't right about you. He was cruel and wrong, and he destroyed something precious because he was too stubborn to see what he had." Derek showed me his recent artwork, pieces Head created late at night when the pain in his leg kept him awake. They were haunting and beautiful, full of loneliness and longing, but also showing incredible skill and emotional depth. "These are amazing, Derek. You have so much talent. You always did." He shook his head. "Talent doesn't matter when you're 32 years old, living in a trailer and working at a fast food restaurant for minimum wage." I told Derek about Mom's death, about her final words, and he broke down again. "She wanted me to tell you that she loved you and that she was sorry," I said, holding him while he cried. "She thought about you every single day." We talked for hours that first day, and I learned about the depth of suffering my brother had endured while I'd been living my comfortable life in Connecticut. That night, back at the hotel, I told Trevor, "I'm bringing him home. I don't care what it takes. He's not staying in that trailer." Trevor nodded. "What about your dad?" I thought about Dad, about how Head forbidden Derek's name to be spoken, about how Head erased his own son from existence. "I'll deal with Dad. Derek's coming home." The next day, I helped Derek pack up his meager belongings. He couldn't believe I was serious about bringing him back east. "What about Dad?" He made it clear I'm not welcome. I looked my brother in the eye. "Dad doesn't get to control our lives anymore. You're my brother, and you're coming to stay with Trevor and me. We have plenty of room, and Lily can't wait to meet her uncle." The mention of his niece made Derek cry again. "I have a niece." His voice was full of wonder. "You have a niece who is smart and funny, and who's going to love you so much." 6 months after I brought Derek back east, where he'd been slowly recovering in our guest room and finally getting proper medical treatment for his leg, my phone rang at 6 in the morning. It was Bethany, and her voice was different. Shaky. "Dad collapsed last night. They took him to Hartford Hospital. Mal, it's bad. You need to come." I woke Trevor, and we drove to the hospital, leaving Derek with Lily because I wasn't ready for him to face Dad again, and I certainly wasn't ready for the explosion that meeting would cause. At the hospital, we found Bethany in the waiting room, her designer suit wrinkled for once, her makeup smeared from crying. Dad had been diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer that had metastasized to his bones. The doctors said he had maybe 3 to 6 months, possibly less. Had apparently been ignoring symptoms for over a year, too stubborn to see a doctor until he literally couldn't get out of bed from the pain. They had him on morphine now, and he was drifting in and out of consciousness. Over the next few months, I watched my father waste away. The mighty Gerald Harper, who'd always seemed larger than life, cruel and powerful and unstoppable, became a skeleton in a hospital bed. I went to see him regularly, but our conversations were stilted and uncomfortable. I wanted to tell him that Derek was alive, that I'd found him, that he was living in my house, but every time I opened my mouth to say it, something stopped me. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe it was knowing that Dad would find a way to hurt Derek even from his deathbed. Bethany practically lived at the hospital during those final months, and I had to admit she was devoted to Dad in her way. She'd sit by his bed for hours, holding his hand, reading to him, managing his care with the same efficiency she brought to her consulting work. Dad would smile at her, this weak, painful smile, and tell her how proud he was. "My successful daughter, my brilliant girl, you're everything I hoped you'd be." Bethany would glow under his praise, even as he was dying. She never once asked about Derek. Not once in all those months did she wonder where her other brother was or what had happened to him. It was like Derek had never existed to her at all. One day, about 2 months before Dad died, I finally tried to bring Derek up. "Dad, I found Derek. Hess alive." Dad's eyes opened, focused on me with surprising clarity despite the morphine. "I don't want to hear that name." His voice was weak but filled with the same stubbornness that had ruled our lives. "Hez your son. You're dying. Don't you want to see him? Don't you want to make peace?" Dad turned his face away from me. That boy chose his path. I have nothing to say to him. Those were the last words Dad ever spoke to me about Derek. Dad died on a cold November morning. Trevor and I were at home when Bethany called with the news. "Has gone," she said, her voice hollow. "He went peacefully in his sleep." I felt numb. I'd prepared myself for this for months, but the reality of Dad actually being dead felt surreal. Derek was in the kitchen making breakfast when I got off the phone. He looked at my face and knew immediately. "It was Dad, wasn't it?" I nodded. Derek sat down heavily in a chair. "I know I should feel something, relief, or sadness, or closure, but I just feel empty." We sat together in silence, two children who'd been shaped and damaged by the same man, trying to process a loss we'd already grieved years ago. The funeral was 3 days later, a massive affair with hundreds of people from Dad's law firm, his country club, his various professional associations. Bethany had planned everything down to the smallest detail. She gave a beautiful eulogy about what a wonderful father Gerald Harper had been, how he'd taught her about excellence and ambition and never settling for less than the best. I sat in the front pew and wondered if we were talking about the same man. Derek didn't come to the funeral. We both agreed it would cause more problems than it would solve, and honestly, I don't think Derek could have handled seeing Dad's face one last time, even in death. The reading of the will happened the following week at Dad's lawyer's office in downtown Hartford. Mr. Holloway had been Dad's attorney for 30 years, a tall man with white hair and the kind of formal demeanor that made everything feel like a courtroom. Bethany was there, wearing all black, her eyes still red from days of crying. Trevor came with me for moral support. We sat in the leather chairs in Mr. Holloway's conference room, and he opened a thick folder containing Dad's last will and testament. I wasn't expecting much. It already established my own career, my own life. Whatever Dad left behind felt tainted anyway, built on the cruelty head shown Derek. But what Mr. Holloway read out made my blood run cold. Dad's estate was valued at $1.2 million, not an enormous fortune, but a significant amount built up over 40 years of successful legal practice, smart investments, and the family home that had appreciated substantially in value. The way Dad had divided it was telling. To my daughter Bethany Harper, I leave the sum of $800,000 to support her continued education and to ensure her future success. Bethany's face lit up with a mixture of grief and satisfaction. $800,000. Enough to secure her future for a very long time. Then Mr. Holloway cleared his throat and continued. To my daughter Mallory Harper, I leave the sum of $400,000 with the following specific provision. My stomach dropped even before he finished reading. These funds are designated exclusively for the payment of educational loans on behalf of my daughter Bethany Harper, who will be attending Columbia Law School beginning in the fall. Mallory is to act as trustee for these funds, ensuring they are used solely for the purpose of Bethany's legal education, including tuition, books, and reasonable living expenses during her 3 years of law school attendance. Mr. Holloway looked up from the document. There's an additional clause that states if the funds are used for any other purpose, they will be forfeit and revert to Bethany's control. The room was silent for a moment. Trevor's hand found mine under the table. Bethany was smiling, actually smiling. Dad thought of everything, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. He knew I'd need help with Columbia's tuition. It's over $250,000 for the 3-year program. She looked at me expectantly, as if I should be thrilled to be handing her even more money than she was already getting. Mr. Holloway explained the details. The $400,000 was technically mine, but Dad had created a legal framework that essentially forced me to spend it on Bethany's education. If I refused, if I used the money for anything else, Bethany could sue for the full amount plus damages, and according to the way Dad had structured the will, she would almost certainly win. I felt sick to my stomach. Even in death, Dad was controlling us. Head found a way to make me complicit in showering even more advantages on Bethany, while Derek, who'd been cast out and left to suffer, got absolutely nothing. Not a dollar. Not even an acknowledgement that Head existed. It was the final insult, the last twist of the knife Dad had planted in Derek's back 17 years ago. I need some time to think about this, I managed to say. Bethany's eyes narrowed. Think about what? It's Dad's will. It's legally binding. You don't have a choice, Mallory. But she was wrong. I did have a choice. It might cost me everything, but I had a choice. We left Mr. Holloway's office, and I sat in the car for a long time, not starting the engine, just staring out the windshield. Trevor didn't push me to talk. He just sat there with me, his presence steady and solid. Finally, I spoke. Derek has nothing. Has living in our guest room, working a minimum wage job because his credit is destroyed, in constant pain from an injury he couldn't afford to treat properly, and he's still paying off medical debt that will probably follow him for the rest of his life. I turned to look at Trevor. Meanwhile, Bethany has $800,000, and Dad wants me to give her $400,000 more for law school. She probably doesn't even need to attend because she's already making more money than most people ever will. Trevor nodded slowly. What are you thinking? I took a deep breath. I'm thinking that will was written to punish Derek one last time, and I'm thinking I'm not going to let Dad win. That night, after Lily was asleep, I went to Derek's room. He was sitting on the bed with his sketchpad, working on a drawing by the light of the desk lamp. He looked up when I knocked softly on the doorframe. Can't sleep? He asked. I sat down on the edge of his bed. Derek, I need to talk to you about something important. I told him everything about the will, watching his face as he processed that Dad had left him nothing. Not even a mention, not even acknowledgement of his existence. Derek's expression barely changed. He just nodded, like he'd expected exactly this. Of course he didn't leave me anything. Why would he? In his mind, I died the day I walked out of his house. I grabbed Derek's hand. I have a question for you. If you had money, real money, what would you do with it? Derek looked confused by the question. Why are you asking me that? I squeezed his hand. Just answer, please. Derek set down his sketchpad and thought for a moment. I'd get a place of my own. Nothing fancy, but somewhere with enough space that I could have a real studio. Good lighting for painting. Maybe I'd take some classes, learn digital art and animation. And if I had enough, I'd open a small gallery someday. Nothing huge, just a place where artists like me, people who don't fit into the conventional art world, could show their work. His eyes got distant, like he was seeing this future head stopped letting himself dream about. I'd create the kind of space I wish had existed for me when I was younger. Somewhere kids with talent but no support could come and be seen. I felt tears starting to form. That's a beautiful dream, Derek. He laughed bitterly. It's just a fantasy, Mal. People like me don't get those kinds of chances. I'm 32, I have no degree, I have a criminal amount of medical debt, and I've spent the last decade working minimum wage jobs. That ship sailed a long time ago. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our quiet suburban street. What if I told you I could make that dream possible? Derek's voice was sharp. What are you talking about? I turned back to face him. Dad left me $400,000. Well, technically he left it to me to give to Bethany for law school. But legally, once it's transferred to me, I have control over it. Derek's eyes went wide. Mal, no. You can't. That's Bethany's education money. Dad wanted you to use it for her. I sat back down and took both of Derek's hands in mine. Dad wanted to control us from the grave. He wanted to make sure that even in death, he could make you feel worthless while elevating Bethany even higher than she already is. Bethany has $800,000, Derek. Shay's making 6 figures a year. She doesn't need law school, and she certainly doesn't need another $250,000 of support. Derek was shaking his head. But you'll lose everything. Bethany will sue you. She'll destroy you. I smiled, even though I was terrified. Let her try. You're my brother. You've suffered enough. If I can fix even a piece of what Dad broke, I'm going to do it. The next morning, I called Trevor's sister, who was a real estate agent in Portland. Jen, I need you to find me a house. 3 bedrooms, good bones, lots of natural light. Budget is around $380,000, and I need it fast. Jen was confused but professional. Okay, I can do that. Is this for an investment property? I hesitated. It's for family. I'll explain later. Over the next 2 weeks, while Bethany texted me constantly asking when I was going to transfer Dad's money into her education account, Jen sent me listings. We found it on day 12. A beautiful craftsman-style house in a quiet Portland neighborhood. It had 3 bedrooms, one of which had vaulted ceilings and skylights that would be perfect for a studio. There was a detached garage that could be converted into gallery space eventually. The yard was overgrown but had potential. The house needed some work but was structurally sound. It was perfect. I made an offer that same day, using $20,000 from my own savings as earnest money. The offer was accepted within 48 hours. Then came the legal part. I met with a different attorney, a woman named Miss Brennan, who specialized in estate planning and trust law. I explained the situation, and she listened carefully, making notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Technically, once your father's estate transfers those funds to you, they become your property. The will expresses his wishes for how the money should be used, but it doesn't create an enforceable trust with outside oversight. Miss Brennan continued, however, your sister could sue you for breach of fiduciary duty, arguing that you accepted the inheritance with the understanding it would be used for her benefit. Whether she'd win depends on how the will is worded and how a judge interprets your father's intent. I nodded. But I could do this? Legally. Miss Brennan looked me in the eye. You could, but be prepared for consequences. Your sister will almost certainly take legal action, and, depending on how it goes, you could lose not just the 400,000, but potentially face additional damages. I thought about Derek's face when he talked about his dream. I thought about 15 years of suffering that never had to happen. I'll take that risk. The paperwork took 3 weeks to process. During that time, Bethany's texts became more insistent. When are you transferring the money? Columbia needs a deposit. Mallory, answer me. I put her off with vague responses about paperwork and processing times. Meanwhile, I was working with Miss Brennan to structure the house purchase in Derek's name. We used a trust to provide some legal protection, making it harder for anyone to force Derek to sell, even if Bethany won a lawsuit against me. Finally, everything was ready. The money from Dad's estate hit my account on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, it had been transferred to the real estate closing account. By Tuesday evening, Derek's name was on a deed to a house he didn't even know existed. I told Trevor I needed to fly to Portland that weekend. I'm going to tell Derek, and I want to be there to see his face. Trevor hugged me tight. I'm so proud of you. Your dad tried to control you, but you chose love instead. That Saturday morning, I flew to Portland and rented a car. I'd told Derek I was coming to visit, that I wanted to see how he was settling back into his old city, since he'd mentioned maybe moving back there eventually where he felt more comfortable. He met me for coffee, and we spent the morning walking around his old neighborhood, talking and catching up. Then I said, I want to show you something. I drove us to the house. Derek thought we were just looking at properties for fun, maybe dreaming about what could be possible someday. We pulled up to the Craftsman house, and I got out of the car. Come on, let's go inside. Derek followed me, confused. Mal, you can't just walk into someone's house. I pulled a key from my pocket and opened the front door. We stepped inside, and Derek gasped. The house was empty but beautiful, with hardwood floors and built-in bookshelves and those incredible skylights in what would be his studio. He walked through slowly, touching the walls like he couldn't believe they were real. This is incredible. Whoever buys this is going to be so lucky. I handed him the key. You're going to be so lucky. Derek stared at the key in his hand like it might disappear. What? I smiled, tears already starting to fall. It's yours, Derek. I bought it for you. Well, technically you own it. Your name is on the deed. Derek's face went completely white. What are you talking about? How? With what money? I took a deep breath. With Dad's inheritance. The money he wanted me to give to Bethany. I watched understanding dawn on Derek's face, followed immediately by panic. Mal, no. No, no, no. You can't do this. Bethany will destroy you. She'll sue you. You'll lose everything. I grabbed his shoulders. I don't care. You deserve this. You've always deserved this. Dad stole your dreams from you once. I'm not going to let him do it again, even from the grave. Derek collapsed to the floor, actually collapsed, kneeling on the hardwood of his new home with his hands over his face, sobbing. I don't deserve this. I'm not worth it. You're going to lose your house, your savings, everything, and it's because of me. I knelt down beside him and wrapped my arms around my little brother. You are worth it. You've always been worth it. Every single dollar, every single risk, every single consequence. You are my brother, and I love you, and am done watching you suffer for something that was never your fault. We stayed like that for a long time, both of us crying, holding each other in the empty house that was his fresh start. Finally, Derek pulled back and looked at me. Why? Why would you do this? I wiped the tears from his face. Because someone should have fought for you 15 years ago. Someone should have stood up to Dad and protected you. I couldn't do it then, but I can do it now. This is me fighting for you, Derek. Finally, Derek looked around his house, this impossible gift, and I saw something I hadn't seen in his eyes since he was 17 years old. Hope. Real, genuine hope for the future. I flew back to Connecticut on Sunday night, and Monday morning, I sent Mr. Holloway a formal letter stating that I had fulfilled the terms of the will by accepting the inheritance, and that I had chosen to allocate the funds according to my judgment as the recipient. The letter was carefully worded by Miss Brennan to be legally sound while making it clear what he'd done. I sent a copy to Bethany with a simple note. Dad's money has been used to give Derek a home. He needed it more than you need law school. Then I turned off my phone and waited for the explosion. It came faster than I expected. At 2 in the afternoon, my work phone started ringing. Then my office desk phone. Then someone was pounding on my office door. My assistant, looking terrified, cracked the door open. Mallory? There's a woman here who says she's your sister. She's very upset and security is asking if they should call the police. I sighed and stood up. It's okay, Rachel. She's family. I'll handle it. I walked out to the reception area to find Bethany standing there in a designer pantsuit, her face red with fury, attracting stares from everyone in the office. We need to talk. Now. I led her to an empty conference room and closed the door. The moment it clicked shut, Bethany exploded. What did you do? You gave my money to him? That was for my education. That was my future. I stayed calm, which only seemed to make her angrier. It was Dad's money, and he left it to me. I made a decision about how to use it. Bethany was pacing like a caged animal. You had no right. Dad's will was clear. That money was supposed to pay for Columbia. I leaned against the conference table. Actually, if you read the will carefully, it said the money was left to me, with Dad's expressed wish that I use it for your education. But legally, once it was transferred to me, it became my decision. Bethany's eyes were wild. You think you're so clever? You think you can just betray your own family like this? That loser brother of ours abandoned us 15 years ago. He chose to leave. He chose to throw his life away. And you're rewarding him. I felt my own anger rising. He didn't abandon us, Bethany. Dad drove him out for the crime of wanting to pursue his passion instead of conforming to what Dad wanted him to be. Derek has spent 15 years suffering, homeless at times, injured, in debt, all because Dad couldn't accept that his son was different. Meanwhile, you've been handed everything on a silver platter, and you still want more. Bethany's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. You have no idea what I've sacrificed to be where I am. Every achievement, every success, I earned it. I laughed, a harsh sound. You earned it? Bethany, Dad paid for everything. Your Ivy League education, your car, your apartment, your entire life was funded by him while Derek was eating out of dumpsters. And now you have $800,000. You make 6 figures a year. And you're angry because I gave $400,000 to our brother who has nothing? Do you hear yourself? Bethany stepped closer, her voice shaking with rage. That failure doesn't deserve our father's money. He never deserved anything from this family. And you, she pointed a finger at my face. You're just as pathetic as he is. You always were. Always protecting him. Always making excuses for him. Well, now you've made the biggest mistake of your life, because I'm going to sue you for every penny. I'm going to take everything you have, your house, your savings, your daughter's college fund. I'm going to destroy you the way you destroyed my future. I looked at my sister, this stranger wearing Bethany's face, and felt nothing but sadness. Go ahead and sue. Do whatever you need to do. But Derek has a home now. A real chance to rebuild his life. And nothing you do can take that away from him. I made sure of that. Bethany's hand flew up and for a second I thought she might actually hit me, but she stopped herself. I'm not done with you. Not even close. You're going to regret this for the rest of your life. She stormed out of the conference room, leaving the door swinging open, and I heard her heels clicking rapidly across the office floor toward the elevator. I went home early that day, drained from the confrontation. Trevor was there with Lily, making dinner. He took one look at my face and knew. She found out. I nodded and collapsed onto the couch. Lily came over and climbed into my lap. Mommy, why was Aunt Bethany calling you bad names on the phone? My heart broke a little. You heard that, sweetie. Lily nodded. She was really loud. She said you're a thief and you stole her money. But that's not true, right? You're not a thief. I hugged my daughter close. No, baby. I'm not a thief. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about money, and it makes them angry. But I promise you, what I did was right, even if Aunt Bethany doesn't understand that right now. That night, Bethany posted on Facebook. The post was long and detailed, painting me as a vindictive sister who'd stolen her inheritance out of spite. She shared it publicly, tagged dozens of mutual friends and family members, and by morning it had been shared over 200 times. My phone exploded with messages. Some people reached out with support, but others believed Bethany's version of events. Old family friends messaged me asking how I could be so cruel. Distant cousins commented about family loyalty. My notifications were a nightmare of judgment and gossip. The worst part was how it affected Lily. Kids at her school heard their parents talking, and suddenly Lily was coming home crying because her friends were asking if her mommy was going to jail. I had to schedule a meeting with her principal to explain the situation. Sitting in that office trying to maintain my dignity, while defending actions I knew were right, but looked terrible from the outside. Work became uncomfortable too. While my boss was supportive, I could feel other colleagues looking at me differently, whispering when I walked by. Being labeled as someone who stole from family follows you in ways I hadn't anticipated. Through all of this, Derek was beside himself with guilt. He called me every day, sometimes multiple times, begging me to give the house back, to sell it and return the money to Bethany. I can't let you lose everything because of me, Mal. This is exactly what I was afraid of. I destroy everything I touch. Those calls were the hardest, because I had to keep reassuring him that this wasn't his fault, while simultaneously watching my life become increasingly complicated by the choice I'd made. 3 weeks after Bethany's Facebook post, something even worse happened. My Aunt Caroline, my father's younger sister, called me. It always liked Aunt Caroline. She'd been kind to me growing up, had even sided with me a few times when Dad was being particularly harsh. Mallory, honey, I heard about what happened with the inheritance. This is such a difficult situation. Her voice was warm and sympathetic, and I felt myself relaxing slightly. Finally, someone from Dad's side of the family who understood. It's been really hard, Aunt Caroline, but I had to do what I thought was right for Derek. Caroline made sympathetic noises. Of course, of course. You've always had such a big heart. Listen, I know Bethany is talking about legal action, and that's just going to make things worse for everyone. What if I talk to her? Maybe I can mediate this situation, help you two find a compromise. I felt a surge of hope. Would you? That would be amazing. I don't want to fight with Bethany. I just want Derek to have a chance. Caroline assured me she'd reach out to Bethany, that she'd work on smoothing things over. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Maybe this nightmare could end without a court battle. Maybe family could still mean something. I was so naive. 2 months later, Bethany's lawsuit was filed. And when I received the court documents listing the witnesses Bethany planned to call, there at the top was Aunt Caroline's name. I called Caroline immediately, my hands shaking. Aunt Caroline, there must be some mistake. You're listed as a witness for Bethany's lawsuit against me. There was a long pause. When Caroline spoke again, her voice had changed. Gone was the warmth and sympathy. It's not a mistake, Mallory. I'm going to testify about your father's clear intentions for that money. Gerald specifically told me multiple times that he wanted Bethany to become a lawyer, that he was setting aside funds for her education. You knew this, and you deliberately violated his wishes. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. But you said you understood. You said you'd help mediate. Caroline's laugh was cold. I said what I needed to say to understand your thinking, to get information that might be useful in court. Bethany is family, Mallory. Your father was my brother. I'm not going to stand by and watch you disrespect his legacy by handing his hard-earned money to a son who was a disappointment to him. The betrayal was so sharp I could barely breathe. Derek is your nephew, has family too. Caroline's voice was final. Derek stopped being family the day he walked out of Gerald's house. Some choices have permanent consequences. She hung up. I stood there holding my phone, shaking with anger and hurt. Later, I found out through Miss Brennan's investigation that Bethany had paid Caroline $50,000 as a consulting fee for her testimony and support. Blood might be thicker than water, but apparently, money was thicker than both. The lawsuit proceeded. Bethany was seeking the full $400,000 plus an additional $100,000 in damages for emotional distress and lost educational opportunities. If she won, it'd have to sell our house to pay. Trevor and I met with Miss Brennan regularly, preparing our defense, but she was honest about our chances. It's going to be close. The will's language is ambiguous enough that it could go either way. Through all of this, Derek was falling apart. The guilt was eating him alive. One night, he called me at 11 p.m., his voice slurred. I couldn't tell if he was drunk or if it was the pain medication he took for his leg. I'm selling the house. Tomorrow. I'm calling a real estate agent and I'm selling it and giving all the money to Bethany. I can't let you lose Lily's home because of me. I can't be the reason your marriage falls apart or your daughter suffers. I've already ruined enough lives. I was at his house in Portland within 18 hours, having caught the first flight out in the morning. I found Derek sitting on the floor of his empty living room, surrounded by real estate listings head printed out. He looked awful, unshaven, eyes red from crying, hands shaking. I sat down next to him and took the papers away. You're not selling this house. Derek's voice was broken. Yes, I am. Lily is being bullied at school because of me. Trevor is stressed out of his mind. You might lose everything. This house isn't worth that. I'm not worth that. I grabbed his face and made him look at me. You are worth it. You have always been worth it. What's happening isn't your fault. It's Dad's fault for creating this situation. And it's Bethany's fault for being so greedy she can't stand to see you have anything. But it is not your fault. Derek was crying. I've never had anyone fight for me like this. I don't know how to accept it. I hugged him. Then learn. Because I'm not stopping, Derek. I'm going to fight for you until the very end, no matter what it costs. The lawsuit moved forward through the legal system with agonizing slowness. 6 months of depositions, document requests, and mounting legal bills that were draining our savings. Miss Brennan was worth every penny. But even with her family friend discount, we were spending money we didn't have to defend my choice. Bethany had hired Sterling and Associates, a high-powered firm that specialized in estate litigation. Her lead attorney, Mr. Sterling, was everything you'd expect. Expensive suit, slicked back hair, and the kind of courtroom presence that made you feel guilty even when you weren't. The depositions were brutal. Mr. Sterling twisted everything I said, making my love for my brother sound like some kind of conspiracy against Bethany. He'd ask questions like, "Isn't it true that you harbored resentment toward Miss Bethany Harper because your father favored her? And didn't you always feel that Derek Harper received unfair treatment, leading to bias in your decision-making?" I had to sit there and answer calmly while this stranger tried to make my attempt to help my suffering brother sound like a vindictive plot. Bethany's deposition of me was even worse, because she was there in the room, sitting next to Mr. Sterling, watching me with cold eyes while he attacked my character. Meanwhile, Bethany's social media campaign continued. She'd become almost obsessed with painting herself as the victim, posting regular updates about how her cruel sister had stolen her future. She'd share articles about family betrayal, post inspirational quotes about overcoming adversity, and each post would get hundreds of supportive comments from people who only knew her side of the story. Some of her friends started targeting me directly, sending hateful messages or leaving negative reviews on my company's website, claiming I was unethical and couldn't be trusted. The online harassment got so bad that I had to lock down all my social media accounts, and Trevor had to do the same. We tried to shield Lily from it, but kids are cruel and somehow the nastiness always filtered down to her. She started having nightmares and didn't want to go to school. We ended up switching her to a different school district entirely, uprooting her from her friends just to escape the worst of it. The financial strain was enormous. Between legal fees, the emotional toll affecting my work performance, and the stress causing health problems that required their own medical treatment, we were hemorrhaging money. Trevor had to take on extra projects, working nights and weekends. I felt guilty every single day watching my family suffer for my choice, but every time I thought about backing down, I'd remember Derek's face when I gave him the keys to his house. I'd remember 15 years of suffering that never should have happened. And I'd steel myself to keep fighting. 6 months into the legal battle, we got a call that changed everything. It was Horace, the elderly man who'd been my father's household manager for 30 years. Horace was in his 70s now, retired, living in a modest apartment in New Haven. "Miss Mallory, I hope I'm not intruding, but I've been following the lawsuit in the papers. There's something you need to know." My heart started pounding. "What is it, Horace?" There was a long pause. "After your father died, Miss Bethany asked me to clean out his study. She wanted everything boxed up and donated or destroyed. But I found something I think your father would have wanted you to see. He kept journals, Miss Mallory. Detailed journals going back decades. And in the months before he died, he wrote extensively about Derek." I nearly dropped the phone. "What did he write?" Horace's voice was gentle. "He expressed deep regret, Miss Mallory. He wrote about his mistakes with Derek, about how Head let his pride and stubbornness destroy his relationship with his son. There's one entry in particular, dated just 2 days before he died. Would you like me to read it to you?" I was crying already, nodding even though he couldn't see me. "Yes, please." Horace's voice was steady as he read. "I've spent weeks in this hospital bed thinking about my life, about my failures as a father. I was wrong about Derek. Patricia tried to tell me 1,000 times, but I was too stubborn, too convinced that I knew best. I broke that boy's spirit because he didn't fit into the narrow box I'd built for him. I destroyed his dreams because they weren't my dreams. And now he's been gone for 15 years. And I'll die without ever telling him I'm sorry, without ever telling him that he was right to leave, that he deserved better than what I gave him. If there's a heaven and I somehow make it there, the first thing I'll do is beg Patricia's forgiveness for failing our son. And if Mallory ever finds Derek, if she can somehow undo the damage I caused, I hope she does what I was too cowardly to do. Make things right." The silence on the phone line was broken only by my sobbing. Horace continued, "There's more, Miss Mallory. Your father also made a video recording about a week before he died. The nurse helped him set up his phone. He was very weak, but he wanted to get something on record. I have the video file. Would you like me to send it to you?" I could barely speak. "Yes. God, yes. Please send it immediately." Within an hour, I was sitting in Miss Brennan's office watching a video that made everything change. The video showed my father propped up in his hospital bed, gaunt and pale, the cancer having eaten away at the powerful man Head once been. His voice was weak but clear. "My name is Gerald Harper, and I'm recording this on November 3rd because I need to say something while I still have the strength. I made a terrible mistake with my son Derek. I was cruel to him, dismissive of his talents. And ultimately I drove him away from this family because I couldn't accept that he was different from what I wanted him to be. That's on me. That's my failure as a father." Dad paused, breathing heavily, before continuing. "I wrote my will in anger and stubbornness, still trying to control my children even from beyond the grave. But if I'm being honest, in my heart, I know that Derek deserved better. He deserved support and love and the chance to pursue his dreams. I was too proud to admit it while I was alive, too afraid of being seen as weak or wrong. But I was wrong. I was so very wrong." More heavy breathing. "If Mallory finds Derek, and if she has the courage to do what I couldn't, to give him the support he deserved all along, then I hope she does it. I hope she's stronger than I was. I hope she chooses love over pride, because in the end, that's all that really matters. Not money, not success, not conforming to expectations, just love. I wish I'd learned that sooner." The video ended with Dad closing his eyes, exhausted from the effort of speaking. Miss Brennan was silent for a long moment after the video finished. Then she looked at me with something like awe. "This changes everything. This is proof that your father had conflicting feelings about the will, that he recognized his mistakes and had regrets about how Head structured his estate. This could completely undermine Bethany's case." We entered the video and the journal entries as evidence. Mr. Sterling tried to have them excluded, arguing they were hearsay or that they showed diminished capacity due to Dad's medication, but the judge allowed them in. The trial itself was scheduled for early spring, almost a year after Dad's death. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal. Bethany sat at the plaintiff's table looking polished and professional in a navy suit. I sat at the defense table trying not to throw up from anxiety. The jury was selected. 12 people who would decide whether my act of love for my brother was legally defensible or a betrayal of my father's wishes. Mr. Sterling's opening argument painted me as a manipulative woman who'd taken advantage of ambiguous will language to funnel money to her preferred sibling. He characterized Derek as a failure who'd abandoned the family and didn't deserve any inheritance. He made it sound like I was running some kind of scam. Miss Brennan's opening was different. She told Derek's story. A talented young man crushed by a father who couldn't accept him, driven from his home, suffering for years while his sister was showered with advantages. She explained that Id acted out of a moral obligation to correct an injustice, and that the video and journal entries proved Dad himself had come to recognize that injustice before he died. The trial lasted 3 days. Bethany testified first, crying on the stand about how Dad had always promised to support her education, how she'd planned her whole future around attending Columbia Law School, how my actions had destroyed her dreams. It was a compelling performance, and I watched the jury's faces soften with sympathy. Mr. Sterling called Aunt Caroline next, who testified that Dad had been absolutely clear about wanting Bethany to become a lawyer, that it had been his greatest wish. She claimed he'd known all along that the money was meant for Bethany's education and had deliberately subverted Dad's intentions. Her testimony stung because some of it was technically true. Dad had talked about Bethany going to law school, but she left out every bit of context about Derek, about the years of abuse and rejection. When it was Miss Brennan's turn, she called Horace to the stand. Horace, dignified in a suit he'd probably owned for 30 years, testified about finding the journals and the video. He spoke about the Gerald Harper head known privately versus the one the public saw. Mr. Harper was a proud man, often too proud. But in his final days, that pride cracked. He talked to me about regrets, about his son Derek, about mistakes he couldn't undo. The man I sat with in that hospital was very different from the man who wrote that will. Then came the moment that defined the trial. Miss Brennan played Dad's video for the entire courtroom. You could have heard a pin drop as my father's voice, weak and broken, filled the room. Several jury members wiped their eyes. I watched Bethany's face go pale as she heard Dad essentially undermining her entire case from beyond the grave. When the video ended, Miss Brennan called me to the stand. I testified about Derek's childhood, about Dad's cruelty, about the night Derek was forced to leave. I talked about the 15 years he spent suffering while Bethany and I lived comfortable lives. I explained that when I found Derek living in that trailer, in constant pain with crushing debt, I knew that giving him a home was the right thing to do regardless of what any will said. Mr. Sterling's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to make me admit that Id always resented Bethany, that Id used Dad's money out of spite. But I stayed calm and kept repeating the same truth. I did this because it was right. Because my brother deserved a chance that he never got. Because love matters more than money. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. 6 hours during which I sat in the hallway with Trevor, unable to eat or think or do anything but wait. Miss Brennan kept assuring me we had a strong case, but I knew it could go either way. Finally, the bailiff called us back in. The jury had reached a verdict. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The forewoman stood, a middle-aged black woman who'd been taking careful notes throughout the trial. In the case of Harper versus Harper, we find in favor of the defendant, Mallory Harper. The relief was so intense I actually felt dizzy. Trevor grabbed my hand and squeezed it so hard it hurt. The forewoman continued. We find that while the will expressed Gerald Harper's intentions, the evidence shows those intentions were conflicting and that Mr. Harper himself had significant regrets about his treatment of his son Derek. The defendant acted in good faith to correct what she reasonably perceived as an injustice. The inheritance was legally transferred to her, and she had the right to allocate those funds according to her judgment. The judge nodded and addressed Bethany. Miss Harper, your claim is dismissed with prejudice. You are also ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees in the amount of $78,000. Bethany's face went from pale to bright red. She stood up so fast her chair fell over. This is insane. That money was mine. Dad promised it to me. The judge's voice was sharp. Miss Harper, you will control yourself in my courtroom, or you will be held in contempt. The jury has spoken. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a crack that felt like thunder. Bethany was screaming now. Really screaming, pointing at me across the courtroom. I hate you. Do you hear me? You're not my sister. You're dead to me. Both of you are dead to me. Security guards moved toward her, and Mr. Sterling was trying to calm her down, but Bethany was beyond reason. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the courtroom, her heels echoing on the marble floor, her voice carrying back through the doors. This isn't over. I'll appeal. I'll fight this until I die. But it was over. Miss, Brennan hugged me, professional boundaries forgotten in the moment of victory. Trevor was crying. I was crying. Wed won. Not just the case, but something bigger. Wed won the right to choose love over money, to choose family over inheritance, to choose what was right over what was easy. That night, I called Derek to tell him. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with anxiety because he'd been waiting all day for news. The jury found in our favor. You get to keep your house. It's really yours, Derek. It's really, truly yours. Derek couldn't speak. All I heard was sobbing on the other end of the line. Finally, he managed to say, "Thank you. Thank you for fighting for me when no one else ever did." 6 months after the trial ended, I stood in Derek's gallery in Portland during his opening night. Had spent the months since the verdict transforming his life in ways it barely dared to hope for. The house had become both his home and his workspace, with the upstairs bedroom converted into a studio where he painted almost every day. Had used some small savings to take online courses in digital art and marketing. And now, here we were, in a small, rented gallery space in Portland's Pearl District, surrounded by Derek's artwork hung on white walls under careful lighting. The pieces were stunning. Some painted traditionally in oils and acrylics, others created digitally and printed on canvas. They told stories of pain and survival, of darkness and hope, of broken things being slowly repaired. Each piece had a little red sold sticker next to the price. By the end of the night, Derek had sold 15 pieces for a total of $30,000. I watched him talk to buyers, saw his face light up when people genuinely connected with his work, and I thought about how close we'd come to this never happening. Trevor and Lily were there too. Lily, now 9 years old and much more understanding of what had happened over the past year, held her uncle's hand and told anyone who would listen. "My uncle Derek is a famous artist." Derek would laugh and correct her. "Not famous yet, kiddo, but maybe someday." The gallery showing led to other opportunities. A local coffee shop chain commissioned Derek to create artwork for their locations. A children's book author saw his work and hired him to do illustrations. Slowly but surely, Derek was building the career he'd dreamed of as a teenager, the one Dad had crushed before it could begin. He was even beginning to pay down his medical debt, making real progress for the first time in years. His limp was still there, probably always would be, but had found a good pain management doctor and was learning to work with his body's limitations rather than fighting them. The night of the gallery opening, after most people had left and it was just family cleaning up, Derek pulled me aside. "I need you to know something. I spent so many years angry at Dad, at the world, at myself. But being here, having this chance, it's taught me something. Bitterness only poisons you. I don't forgive Dad for what he did, but am not going to let what he did define the rest of my life either." He looked around at his artwork, at this space he'd created. "This right here, this is me taking back what he tried to take away. And I couldn't have done it without you." The legal battle with Bethany never really ended in the sense that our relationship was destroyed beyond repair. She didn't appeal the case, but she never spoke to me again either. She blocked me on every platform, returned my emails unopened, and made it clear through intermediaries that, as far as she was concerned, she had no sister. Last I heard, she'd gotten into Columbia law after all, paying for it herself with her $800,000 inheritance and some loans. Aunt Caroline tried to reach out to me once, sending an awkward email apologizing for her testimony but explaining she'd felt obligated to honor Dad's memory. I never responded. Some betrayals cut too deep to forgive easily, if ever. The harder part was explaining everything to Lily as she got older. How do you tell your daughter that her grandfather was cruel, that her aunt chose money over family, that sometimes doing the right thing costs you dearly? We tried to be age-appropriate but honest. Sometimes people in families disagree about what's important. Trevor would tell her, "Your mom chose to help Uncle Derek because he needed help, and that made Aunt Bethany very angry. But your mom did what she thought was right, even though it was hard." Lily processed it in the way kids do, asking questions at random times. "Is Aunt Bethany ever going to come back?" "Probably not, sweetheart." "Does she hate Uncle Derek?" "I think she's very angry and hurt, and sometimes people stay angry for a long time. But what Mommy did was good, right?" "Yes, baby. What Mommy did was very good." A year after the trial, Horace passed away peacefully in his sleep. At his small funeral, I learned that Head left most of his modest savings to a scholarship fund for underprivileged art students at the local community college. Even in death, he was trying to help kids like Derek who had talent but no support. I cried at his funeral, grieving not just for Horace but for all the good people who get caught up in other people's messes, who try to do right in a world that doesn't always reward it. We also learned from Horace's lawyer that Dad had apparently tried to change his will in his final weeks, but hadn't been lucid enough to sign the paperwork. The draft of the new will, found in Horace's belongings, left money to all three of us equally with no conditions. Bethany dismissed it as the rambling of a dying man on too much morphine, but I knew the truth. Dad had tried in the end to fix what had broken. He just ran out of time. I think about Dad sometimes, about what made him the way he was. His own father had been hard on him, had demanded perfection, had shown love only through achievement. Dad had simply repeated the pattern, unable to break the cycle of conditional love. It doesn't excuse what he did to Derek, but it helps me understand it. And understanding, even without forgiveness, brings a kind of peace. Derek and I talk almost every day now. Sometimes it's just quick texts or funny memes we share. Sometimes it's long phone calls where we process our childhood or talk about Mom or just catch up on life. Hez started dating someone, a woman named Rachel who runs a bookstore and loves his art. He sounds happy when he talks about her, really happy in a way I wasn't sure He'd ever be capable of feeling again. Hez even begun therapy to work through the trauma of his childhood and the years of homelessness. "I'm learning that I don't have to carry Dad's rejection with me everywhere I go," he told me recently. "That's his burden, not mine. I get to decide who I am now." Last month, Derek came to visit us in Connecticut for the first time since He'd left at 17. It was strange having him in our home, watching him interact with Lily, seeing him sit at our dinner table. He kept looking around like he was waiting for Dad to appear and yell at him, but slowly, over the course of the visit, I watched him relax. On his last night, we sat on the back porch after Lily had gone to bed, drinking wine and looking at the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Derek asked quietly. "Giving me the money? Losing Bethany? All the legal fees and stress? Do you ever wish you'd just done what Dad wanted?" I thought about it honestly. Some days during the worst of the trial, when Lily was crying or when the bills were piling up, I'd have moments of doubt. But no, Derek, I don't regret it. Not for a second. You know why? He shook his head. Because family isn't about who shares your blood or who gets the biggest inheritance. It's about who shows up. It's about who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself. And it's about choosing love over everything else, even when that choice costs you. Derek was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I used to think I was worthless because Dad said I was. I spent 15 years believing that my dreams were stupid, that I was a failure, that I didn't deserve good things. But you giving me that house, you fighting for me in court, you standing up to everyone including Dad's memory. it wasn't just about the money, Mal. It was you telling me I was worth fighting for. And that changed something fundamental in how I see myself. He turned to look at me, tears in his eyes. I'm never going to be able to repay you for what you did. But I promise you this. I'm going to live a life that makes your sacrifice worth it. I'm going to create beauty, help other artists who feel lost like I was. And I'm going to be the kind of person who deserves to have a sister like you. We hugged on that porch for a long time. Two people who'd survived a family that tried to break them, who'd found their way back to each other despite everything. As I stood there with my brother in my arms, I thought about Mom's dying words. Find your brother. Tell him I'm sorry. I'd done that and more. I'd given him back the future Dad had stolen. I'd chosen him over money, over Dad's approval, over keeping the peace with Bethany, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because in the end, after all the legal battles and family drama and years of pain, I'd learned something simple and profound. Love isn't about grand gestures or perfect families. It's about showing up. It's about fighting for the people who matter even when it's hard. It's about choosing compassion over cruelty, hope over bitterness, and connection over control. Dad had spent his whole life trying to shape us into what he wanted us to be, trying to control us through money and expectations and conditional approval. But in the end, the only thing that really mattered was whether we chose to love each other. And I chose Derek. Every single time, I would choose Derek. 3 months ago, Derek called with news that made me cry happy tears. Had gotten a commission to paint a mural for a youth homeless shelter in Portland. The mural would depict the journey from darkness to light, from homelessness to home, from despair to hope. They were paying him $15,000, the biggest commission of his new career. But more than the money, Derek was excited about the impact. Kids who are going through what I went through will see this every day. Maybe it'll give them hope that things can get better. On the day Derek started the mural, he sent me a photo. It showed a house with a wide open door, light streaming out into darkness, and a figure walking toward it. At the bottom in Derek's distinctive artistic lettering were the words, "Home, for the first time." That image sits on my desk at work now, a reminder of why I made the choice I did. When people ask about it, I tell them it's by my brother, that he's a talented artist who's rebuilding his life after years of hardship. I don't usually tell them the whole story because it's too complicated, too painful, too personal. But sometimes, when someone seems genuinely interested, I'll share pieces of it. And every single time, they say the same thing: you did the right thing. I know I did. Not because a jury said so, not because Dad's video vindicated me, but because Derek has a home now. He has a chance. He has hope. And that's worth more than any inheritance, any relationship with Bethany, any amount of money or approval, or conventional family harmony. That's worth everything. So here's what I want to know from all of you watching this. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you ever had to stand up for someone when everyone else turned against them? Drop your stories in the comments below, because I think we all need to hear that we're not alone in facing these impossible choices. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about what really matters in life, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs to hear that choosing love over money is always the right choice, even when it's the hardest choice. To everyone who's ever felt like the black sheep of their family, to everyone who's been rejected for being different, to everyone who's fighting to rebuild after life knocked them down, you are worthy. You are valuable. You deserve people who will fight for you. Don't let anyone, not even family, convince you otherwise. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that families are complicated, that doing the right thing isn't always easy, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to let someone else's cruelty define the people you love. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember that home isn't a place, it's the people who refuse to give up on you. Until next time.